Hello and welcome to another standard video. Today we're checking out this red-white or boros control deck that's built around some of these self-mill artifacts. We've got 3 copies of the Ark of Hunger, a 4-mana artifact saying whenever 1 or more cards leave your graveyard, it deals 1 damage to each opponent and you gain 1 life. You can also tap the Ark to mill a card that we get to play this turn. So if we play the Ark and manage to mill a spell or even a land that we can still play from the graveyard, we get to trigger the Ark, dealing 1 and gaining 1 in the process. The Ark is great in multiples, since of course the more Arks we have in play, the more damage we get to deal if we play something from the graveyard, and it also synergizes quite well with the Tablet of Discovery, a 3-mana artifact that when it enters mills a card that we get to play this turn, the tablet making a red mana or double red to cast instant and sorcery spells, which is awesome in a control deck that's looking to ramp into some expensive sorceries. And then Pursue the Past also kind of ties it all together as a 2-mana sorcery that lets us gain 2 life. We can discard a card if we do draw 2, and then can be flashed back for 4 mana to do it all over again. And by flashing back Pursue the Past, we can also trigger the Ark of Hunger, since that's another way for a card to leave the graveyard. And then, as I mentioned, we are looking to ramp into some expensive spells with the tablet, and the main one is the Improvisation Capstone, playing 3 copies for this Paradigm lesson, and then once the Paradigm card resolves, we'll get to cast it for free at the start of every main phase going forward, which is incredibly powerful. And then the Capstone lets us exile cards from the top of our library until we exile cards with total mana value 4 or greater, and we get to cast any number of them without paying their mana costs. So the Capstone is a steady stream of extra cards each turn that we don't even have to pay for, and it also synergizes incredibly well with Quintorius Kant, the 5-mana 4-loyalty planeswalker, saying whenever we cast a spell from exile, Quintorius deals 2 damage to each opponent and we gain 2 life. So if we cast the Capstone using the Paradigm mechanic, it will trigger Quintorius, and then any additional spells we cast with the Capstone will also trigger Quintorius separately, dealing another 2 damage and gaining 2 life in the process. Quintorius can also plus to make a spirit token, which then builds up the -6 ultimate, where we can then replay spells out of our graveyard, and then -3 lets us discover 4, can also maybe hit a sweeper with it, and that will also trigger Quintorius's passive ability in the process. And then rounding out the deck, we just want lots of interaction to support the late game plan of Ark and the Capstone. So at 1 mana, we've got 2 copies of Burst Lightning, dealing 2 damage to any target, can also kick it for 4 damage instead. Another card we can also maybe mill with the tablet on turn 3 and then still cast using the red mana. Same with the Soul Guide Lantern, which can exile a card when it enters, so great against any graveyard decks. Can then also sacrifice it to exile the opponent's entire graveyard, so it can slow down maybe an I Still Explore by getting rid of a fetch land, good against Nature's Rhythm, which has Harmonize. Can also slow down the various Spelemental decks, as reducing their graveyard makes it harder for them to cast an Eddy Merc Crab, but of course at its best against any Kivero Reanimator decks. And then if we don't need the Lantern, we can always pay 1 mana and sacrifice it to draw a card. Occasionally, you also want to exile a card from your own graveyard when the Soul Guide first enters, which is another way of triggering the Ark of Hunger, because that's another way for a card to leave your graveyard, so that's another hidden synergy that can maybe net you a few more points of damage. Then at 2 mana, we've got a full set of Lightning Helix, dealing 3 to any target and gaining 3, so even if we exile it with a Capstone and the opponent doesn't have any creatures in play because we destroyed them all, we can still go upstairs and kind of complement the Ark burn plan. And then we also have a couple sweepers here at 2 mana with Pyroclasm, dealing 2 damage to each creature, especially good against any green decks with Llanowar Elves and Banjo Mole Cubs, and if it doesn't line up, we always have our Pursue the Past to get rid of it. And then Get Lost, an answer to creatures, enchantments, and planeswalkers. And then at 3 mana, we've got a few more board wipes with 2 copies of Split Up, destroying either tapped or untapped creatures, and then the full set of Day of Judgment at 4 to simply destroy all creatures to keep the board nice and clear. So yeah, that's pretty much our entire deck. The mana base is very streamlined, as many red-white dual lands as possible, with a Parlor entering tapped and letting us surveil 1, Sacred Foundry, Sunbillow Verge, and the new Sundown Pass, which is back in standard, and then plenty of basics as well. So yeah, that's our deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, we're on the play. We have a functional hand, some early creature interaction, some graveyard hates. Can wait on the Lantern on the off chance that our opponent is an actual graveyard deck, so we can exile something relevant. If not, Burst Lightning can still answer the Chocobo, could also wait and then set up Pyroclasm. I do get punished if our opponent plays a fetch land next turn, but I guess what I'll do is just play the Lantern, pass with Burst Lightning up, and then if they play a fetch land I can still Burst Lightning if needed. Otherwise hope that they commit another creature that dies to Pyroclasm. They do not. So I'll draw. And then, yeah, I guess I could Burst Lightning now, or in their upkeep, in case they have a protection spell. Upside of Burst Lightning now is that I can also Pyroclasm, but if they have a protection spell, 2 damage would not be enough. So, yeah, I guess we just go Parlor. Don't need another land. And then pass. Burst Lightning now. Could also wait for them to play a land, but then there's maybe some 3-mana instance like Archdruid's Charm that factor into the equation. Okay, so now Pyroclasm answers the Hydra. I kind of like all the cards in my hands, so I'm not sure what I want to discard to pursue. We are still kind of far from the Capstone, admittedly, and I could find another copy, but it is the type of game-winning card that we want to have available at some point. Also need to make sure I keep hitting my land drops. So maybe I actually discard a land, even though I want to draw them. Because Arc can also help me hit the land drops. But we also need to find more answers. So that worked out. Opponent's got another Hydra. It is kind of a must-answer card because of Planar Engineering being a thing now too. So yeah, I'm just gonna have to Day of Judgment for the 1/1, leaving us out of answers. But we are creeping ever closer to the 7-mana Capstone. A 3rd Hydra was not on my radar. Alright, so yeah, if we don't draw another answer we could be dead. That was convenient. Alright, so ideally find an untapped land for Capstone. For a Boroid now too, so it's a bit of a mix of the Landfall deck and the Badger Mole variants. Can just play Kick Burst Lightning, that's definitely the safest play in case we fail to find a sweeper in the next few turns. So a lot of heavy hitters. Now the Traveling Chocobo finds a land of the top. Basing Se can also be an issue. And a Badger Mole Cub. I mean, they keep giving us the sweepers, so I think we run it back. At some point I'll get a land for the Capstone. Until then, just keep wiping the board. Alright, our opponent's finally just gonna activate Basing Se. So for 1 turn there's no meaningful pressure, and that's the perfect opportunity to resolve the Capstone. Hitting a bunch of goodies, so I don't need to cast the Get Lost, I'll just Pyroclasm, and then Lantern is still free card draw. And then exile the fetch land in case of an Ice Still Explorer. Okay, so now ideally find a Quintorius to try and get the game over with. Possible our opponent can win out of nowhere with the Harmonizer, but they also need to have a creature that can attack. And without a fetch land in the graveyard, without an Ice Still in play, that's a lot less likely. So our opponent fetches, and they do have the Ice Still. Could have exiled their graveyard with Lantern. Think I wait. So this is the 2nd land they've played for now. Because Escape Tunnel's not as scary as Fabled Passage. And we're somewhat likely to find removal for the Ice Still here. Cast a Capstone. And we hit Helix and split up. So then now I get to play the Arc. Another Capstone is not getting cast. So then just pass a turn. If they cast another Ice Still, I will consider exiling the graveyard. Forest into Llanowar Elves is fine. Just take 2. And Day of Judgment wipes the board. And another Arc is excellent. We are running sort of low on cards, so I have to think twice about milling myself, because if I mill Quintorius I wouldn't be able to cast it. Same with another Arc. But there's still plenty of lands in the deck. And that would get 2 more Arc triggers. Could flashback Pursue, but I'm happy hanging on to double Lightning Helix. There's the Harmonizer. Could double Helix it, but since they're not threatening lethal, I can just wait and see what we get off the Capstone. Now triple Helix, so we're getting close to burning them out. And we found Quintorius. Alrighty, so we'll first maybe mill with Arc. Okay, play my lands, get 2 damage. And then Quintorius could discover 4. Could also draw with Lantern. We've hit a decent amount of sweepers already, so not counting on finding another. Yeah, I'll still discover. Get Lost is a pretty clean answer here. And now our opponent's at 9, so I can triple Helix them. A little bit short of also flashing back Pursue, so I don't think I have lethal right now. Let's see, whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard... Oh, never mind, does Lantern work? No, Lantern doesn't exile stuff from our own graveyard if we sacrifice it. So I guess I could sack it now to see if I draw another Lantern, maybe. I actually did. So now I can exile something from my graveyard, which will trigger the Arc. And then now triple Helix is game. Although it would have been fun to see Quintorius deal a bunch of damage with a Capstone. And there we go. Sweet, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw. We have a hand that will need to hit a 3rd land drop. Can of course cycle the Lantern. And then we're still missing some interaction. So it's not perfect, but Tablet is one of our better cards. So I'm willing to give it a shot. And black-green, Llanowar Elves. I'll still go with a tapped Sundown Pass. If I top deck like a Pyroclasm, we may want to be able to cast it. So it's a Sultai deck, opponent keeping up 3 mana. They could have attacked with Elves. So, yeah, not exactly sure what to make of it yet. Can draw with a Lantern, end of turn. And an Ouroboros, of course, on turn 3. So we'll need to find one of our many sweepers. Oh, that'll do. So we'll hit untapped creatures. Could also wait a turn, play the tablets, but the problem is our opponent would then play more creatures that are presumably untapped, so that I'm not going to get with Split Up, which will still pick up at least 2+1 counters from Ouroboros. So this seems a little safer. And then next turn there's a chance I can play whatever I mill with a tablet. Elves hits for 2. Okay, go for tablets. If we mill a land, I can still play it. And a Quandrix Charm to counter it. Another Ouroboros. And another Elves. So yeah, Day of Judgment would be our best draw now. Pyroclasm doesn't quite do it. So then, what's the plan? I can pursue. If I hit a land plus Burst Lightning, I can combine it with Pyroclasm to still answer Ouroboros. Could also just draw with a Lantern. If I hit Burst Lightning, we can make that play. Or we could hit a Split Up. If I go for Tablets, it pays for Pyroclasm. So then I guess Tablet milling Burst Lightning accomplishes the same as just sacking a Lantern, while getting us ahead of mana. So I think I actually start here. Sadly hit the Day of Judgment, so yeah, that was the one draw we did not want to see in this spot. So then I can still Pyroclasm just for 1 Elves. I think I would rather pursue. Am I taking a lethal next turn? 4, 8 plus 5 is 13, so I'm not just dead. I think we pursue. Discarding probably the Pyroclasm. And then we'll have a Day of Judgment available next turn. The floating mana was only for instants and sorceries, so could not sack the Lantern to it. So Day of Judgment, assuming no counter spells, can clean up. Can also pay for another Quandrix Charm. So we'll just tap the tablets, cast a Day of Judgment. That works. And then can sack the Lantern. And likely play another one. Next turn get the Arc down. Okay, opponent had a Drowner end of turn, so that threatens to put us to 2. And now a Bat can take 1 Arc. So with the Pursue the Past, we're potentially still alive. Since we would go back up to 4. Or we can just draw another Day of Judgment. So play Day of Judgment. And then play the Arc. Are we afraid of any hasty creatures? I've seen some weird stuff lately, so I wouldn't be too surprised, but I'll get the Arc down. And then I've already played a land, so there's no point in milling. Alright, so we'll mill first, see what we get. A Lantern. So then I'm okay playing another Arc. Maybe even mill again, although there are a few cards I'm not going to be able to cast. Helix is not one of them. So then I get to Helix face. Play Lantern. And still draw a card. Maybe we'll draw Burst Lightning I can cast. Alright, pass it back. Badger Mole is fine. That's one way of making a hasty 1-1, but we were at 2 earlier. And there's a Burst Lightning. So we should be close to burning them out here. Capstone's a nice one. And a land. So that's 2 damage. So let's see. Whenever 1 or more cards leaves your graveyard, Pursue would be another 2 damage. And then... yeah, I guess a Burst Lightning would put my opponent to 1. So I might still end up casting the Capstone anyways here. Also, it's just more fun. But I don't think we necessarily had guaranteed lethal otherwise. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw. We have a keepable hand. Good mix of card draw, ramp, and interaction, facing a red deck. Make that Izzet with Sonar, so this is the Opus combo deck. Okay, so we need to prevent our opponent from going off with the Maestro or the Stallion. Sweepers are good. Sonar, we could get lost now before it generates some treasure. The map tokens aren't too threatening. I guess they can synergize with the Maestro. Opponent stuck on 2. They don't have many counter spells as far as I remember. Could play Tablet now. Could also just pursue. There's nothing I particularly want to discard. Maybe just another pursue. With the idea that if I play Tablet next turn, I can maybe get some immediate value. But yeah, the sweepers should be fine. Opponent has a Prismari Charm to surveil to draw card. Surprised they didn't main phase it to try and hit their land drop. So we've got a lands aplenty now. Do we see a Stallion? Nope, their own Tablet. So they're not getting to play that land now. I'll play my Tablet, and then I can still pursue afterwards. And we found a land, perfect. Keep the sweepers. And next turn we can play our Capstone. So I like where this is headed. But we do have to respect the Opus combo deck, since they can win out of nowhere. Stallion into stock up. So, if I go for the Capstone, there's a chance I die to the Stallion next turn if they can make a bunch of copies. But I also want to get the Capstone going. So I think this is still a good window for it. And we somewhat likely hit a removal spell. Double Helix doesn't pay the ward on Stallion, I guess, so would have had to hit a sweeper. But we also gained 6, so that maybe helps. So now we've got our Capstone. Now it's just a matter of keeping the board clear and riding Paradigm to victory. Alright, Maestro, so looks like we'll get to wipe the board here. And another Capstone. Can spin the wheel again and hit a Day of Judgment, so that saves me from casting one. Alright, so now I want to get the Arc going to increase our clock. See what we mill. Burst Lightning I can play. Can also play another Tablet first. And then I've already played land, so that goes face for 3 damage total. Stallion number 3. I would love to find a Quintorius. A Lantern and Tablet. With Lantern I can also exile something from my graveyard to trigger the Arc. See what we mill. A land. So by flashing back Pursue we also trigger the Arc. Okay, maybe start there. And ditching a land is probably fine. Find another Tablet. Yeah, I do have to be careful that I still leave myself with an answer for the Stallion. So can still play a split up here. Also forgot that I haven't activated the Arc yet to mill. Although now I should maybe not bother, since we can already play a land and cast a Day of Judgment. So there's not much else I could mill that would be useful. Stallion down. And yeah, I'll just pass it back. Can maybe draw with Lantern end of turn. Don't think I need to exile their graveyard just yet. Ashling's Command making treasure drawing cards. That's how they can copy the Stallion pretty easily. And another tablet, so that's fine. Fine Quintorius, perfect. So that can deal a lot of damage with a Capstone, although the game might be over before we get to that point. Another Arc would also speed things up. Alright, so play Quintorius or maybe Flashback Pursue. I guess Quintorius could also discover into another Arc, the problem being that our opponent could also use their treasures to maybe burn it out. So I'll start here. We have 23 cards remaining. We did already cast 2 copies of Lightning Helix, now Burst Lightning can also go face. So that plus a Lantern and a Flashback Pursue, can we cast all of those? I think we can. So tap these for double red, can mill with Arc. And that's 1 more damage. And then I guess Quintorius could also discover, dealing 2 more. But playing the Lantern, exiling something from my own graveyard would also do it. And there we have it. Awesome. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play with a fine hand. Good mix of ramp, card draw, and interaction. And Lantern gives us Graveyard Hate, which might be the missing piece. Put on blue-black. Can't exclude a graveyard deck, so still want to hang on to the Lantern. Blue-black, probably not a matchup where I need Day of Judgment too badly. So I think I'll get rid of it here. Deceit's gonna have a look. So this could be the Doomsday combo deck with Kivero, which can also get back the Deceit. Opponent did indeed get rid of the Lantern. Alright, so play Tablet. Sadly, Capstone is not getting cast. And a stock up. So it's not a Sultai graveyard deck, but definitely points more towards the Excruciator combo deck. So Lantern's going to be important, if we can find another copy. But yeah, our deck is pretty slow at closing out the game. So our opponent's probably going to be favored in setting up their combo. But Triple Arc can put in some work, so we'll see. Pylons is a bit unusual, since it doesn't help cast Excruciator or set up a turn 4 Kivero for Deceit. So maybe not your typical build. But they do indeed have Kivero as well as Arden. So it's actually much more Reanimator focused than I originally had in mind. Even an Iron Shield Elf. So yeah, a Lantern would make a huge difference here. We're also notoriously bad at answering Iron Shield Elf, since all our removal deals damage or destroys. So I can play another Arc before playing the lands. And then... let's see. Yeah, I don't know if I should be tapping the tablet yet. I don't think it makes a difference. But maybe I'll mill a white card that I can still play now. Like a Get Lost. So I have to cast it now. Going for Elf just forces them to discard, can get rid of the Overlord, which gives the opponent a better target for Arden. So I guess I'll force them to discard just to trigger the Arc twice. Discards another Elf, which could have been problematic. So your opponent gets to play Kivero on Arden and get back something else, like maybe a Kiora. So yeah, a Lantern could have prevented this. Now we are still at 27, so we do have some life total to play with. So Kiora threatening to make the Scion of the Deep. So now a Sweeper could buy us some more time. And we do get a few looks with double Arc. Find Tablet. And the land. So yeah, I think we go for Tablet instead of another Arc from hand. And mill another land. And then I could play another Tablet. If I tap the tablets in the process, I can still maybe mill a Day of Judgment and cast it. Pyroclasm doesn't do much, just forces another discard from the Elf, perhaps. So then I would rather pursue. Also triggers Arc at least. Alright, that's a bunch of lanes. So 27, I don't think we're dying, but yeah, this is maybe my last turn to find some answers. So there's another Overlord. And they are on the build with Bringer of the Last Gift, so just blue-black foregoing the green. The Seat could have another look, take away our third Arc. No, they're just gonna bounce the one I already had in play. Anything else? Opponent's gonna go exploring onto the Elf, makes sense. It's definitely the safest target. And as I mentioned, we're gonna struggle to deal with Elf, so we can need to overpower it some other way. So now Arden gets back another Elf. Yeah, they've identified that it's their best win condition here. Fall to 1. So not quite dead. And find a Capstone. Let's see what else we find. Tablets. Yeah, the problem now is our opponent's got 2 indestructible creatures in play. So even if we hit a Sweeper, we're still pretty dead. Yeah, what's the plan here? I can play the Capstone just using 3 tablets pretty much, or even 4 tablets. So I could even play another Arc first, play a tablet, and then still play the Capstone. So that's plus 2 damage and 2 life. So it all comes down to what I can hit with my Improvisation Capstone. I doubt it's going to be good enough, but yeah, we can hope. Quintorius, sadly, is not getting cast here. And we hit some goodies. Split up, destroy all tapped creatures. But the problem is still the 2 Iron Shield elves. So these can just go upstairs. But yeah, the Iron Shield's still gonna get me. This was definitely a card I had in mind when building the deck, that if our opponent is on, let's say, the Mardu discard deck, we could struggle to deal with it. But yeah, turns out our opponent's also using it in their Reanimator deck instead. Of course, if we hit the Lantern to exile their graveyard, they never would have gotten to this spot to begin with. But yeah, now the game should just be over. The seat will have a look, takes another arc. And take 9. GG's, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw with a functional hand. You get to cycle through the deck with double pursue, tablet for bitter ramp. And we've got interaction. Facing a red-white. Capstone's what we want to ramp into. So now it's just a matter of getting there. Okay, opponent on the Mardu discard deck. Inti is definitely worth removing. So, could wait. Cool but rude happens, so now we get to remove Inti, and they don't get to trigger their enchantment, which they were maybe counting on. Still gonna go for tablet, even though I'm not gonna be able to play whatever I mill, unless it's a burst lightning. Well, I guess Lantern works, and is actually relevant in the matchup, since they do have some Bloodghast, typically, that they're planning to get back. The Mako is next. And Burst Lightning, not a bad draw. So I can make 2 mana with the tablets. Cast a Pursue. Probably discarding another copy. Found our land. So I could Pursue again, or I could just deal with the Mako and then play a tap land. It's probably fine. Don't think I need to keep up Get Lost, although I guess it's also an answer to the Cool but Rude. Sure, so then Burst Lightning the Shark before it can get too large. And then pass with the plan of destroying Cool but Rude, leaving a mana for Lantern. Opponent's gonna level up. Can destroy it now. And draw my card. Found the land, so now we get to play the Capstone. And Quintorius was a great hit. And our opponent scoops it up. Yeah, now with Quintorius and the Capstone, we'll get a bunch of free damage from our Planeswalker each turn from the spells we cast from exile. And then, of course, the Capstone can also help us take over. Sweet, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw with a functional hand. Got Graveyard Hate, card advantage, and interaction. And we'll just get rid of the Parlor since it enters tapped anyway. So white aggro could be the Aura deck. Pyroclasm seems reasonable if they just play a bunch more 1-drops out. Although something like a Day of Judgment would be more reliable. Opponent does have another Inquisitor. So Pyroclasm's looking good. Probably fine to ditch a Lantern, make it cost 2. There's also a world where I can just go for Sacred Foundry, since I don't have any 3-drop I absolutely need to cast. So we'll just keep it simple, cast a Pyroclasm. Opponent might have had a Shard Mage's Rescue in hand, which is not enough to save the Inquisitor. And our opponent's out of creatures. So, do want to keep Lightning Helix available at all times, so they can't easily enchant their creatures going forward. But we also suspect Shard Mage's Rescue, which is going to make things awkward. So I'll just run out a Lantern here. And can sacrifice at end of turn. Opponent's got the Seam Rip, which doesn't do much since I can just sack the Lantern. So yeah, opponents had a few creatures they got dealt with, and now they might have a hand full of auras in hand that are not being very effective. Probably fine to get the Arc going, no point in milling right now. Third land still doesn't open up any new possibilities. See what we mill. Helix can go face. And then can pursue discarding Soul Guide Lantern. Find a tablet. If I play the tablet, I wouldn't be able to Helix anymore. I'll just Helix now. We don't seem to be in a hurry. Alright, find another sweeper. Mill with Arc. Find Quintorius. So then get Quintorius going, start plussing. Yeah, that's the fate of the Aura deck sometimes. They did actually have a protection spell, but Pyroclasm lined up pretty nicely. Now we might see some fireworks. Survivor into Sheltered by Ghosts. Exiles Quintorius, but not for long. Second attack with my token. Although Split Up is the better sweeper to keep for later. So I could just Helix, pay the ward. Let's see what I mill. Another Lantern. I think I can get away with attacking and then using Split Up on untapped creatures. Can I play the tablet as well? I think I can. Only drawback being if I mill a Capstone, I wouldn't be able to play it, but that's okay. I mean, Day of Judgment also works. I just lose a Spirit token. And then Quintorius can keep plussing. Yeah, the Aura matchup is definitely one of our better ones. Can sometimes be in trouble if our opponent can get an early creature going and kind of snowball it with a bunch of auras. And then our burn spells may not line up, but that's where Split Up and Day of Judgment can still clean up afterwards. So, still looking for the Capstone to get the game over with, but I don't see this one slipping away anymore. Find Pyroclasm. Another Arc. I do have double Lightning Helix in hand. So, can I just kind of burn them out here? Should be getting close. Especially if I mill a land. So that's 2 damage. The attack from the Spirit is another 3. And then double Helix should already do it, or we can start minusing Quintorius to discover. Which is another 2 damage. Hit a Burst Lightning. So yeah, this should be trivial. And then playing Quintorius triggers both arcs as well. And there we have it. Awesome. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play with a functional hand. Start with the Parlor, and then we'll see what our opponent's up to. Day of Judgment seems like a good one to have in the back pocket. Can always discard it with Pursue the Past. Opponent a red-white. So I'm thinking Jeskai Control as the most likely option. Yeah, I could already pursue, could maybe give it another turn to make sure that they're on control. Or I could already ditch this Get Lost, which is maybe our weakest card. Day of Judgment's also not great. Yeah, I don't want to make a rash decision here based on just a Sacred Foundry. So maybe I'll just go a Lantern, pass a turn. Okay, it is just red-white and a Voice of Victory. So maybe the red-white tokens deck. So glad I held on to Day of Judgment and all this removal. So I'll just Helix. Could also wait on Day of Judgment and for now pursue the past. But if they play like a War Leader's Call, they get to deal a bunch of damage without necessarily overextending into my sweeper. So I'll just play it safe. Howl Squad Heavy. Also a good one to clean up with a sweeper. Alright, so I do want to hit an extra land drop here. Burst Lightning doesn't line up great, so that's probably what I get rid of right now. Alright, and then can shock myself so I can Helix the Heavy. And then next turn I can Tablet, wait a bit longer on Day of Judgment. Do I main phase the Helix? I think I can wait. Definitely want to hit it before they make another token. Also have a Get Lost available if they do play a War Leader's Call, which they do. Alright, so then now we Get Lost Call. And then we can clean up the creatures, maybe with the Day of Judgment. Could also be convinced to still play Tablet and then Helix the Heavy. Yeah, that seems fine too, because that sets up our Capstone for next turn. And we even mill the Helix, even better. And Mountain is not a priority anymore. I don't think they'll have a way to get rid of the tablet. So their opponent left with 2 goblins. The encampments can also represent more damage. And they did have another War Leader's Call. Don't have many answers to it, just the one Get Lost remaining. So War Leader's Call is actually pretty scary. And now with the Sharpshooter, they are threatening a lot of damage. So it's probably safer to first Day of Judgment before we Capstone, in case I don't hit a sweeper right away. So then Day of Judgment can still pursue the past, although there's nothing I really want to discard. Helix still seems useful. Although maybe a little bit less useful now with War Leader's Call pumping their team. So I guess I can be convinced to discard the Helix. Finding another Capstone. The second one a lot less important than the first. Bonus got a Delny. Can be a bit of a nombo with the War Leader's Call if your creatures go above 2 power. Sharpshooter on top. Alright, time for a Capstone. And we actually hit Get Lost for War Leader's Call and split up for Delny. So that was ideal. And while you can only paradigm a card once, we can still cast another Capstone just to hopefully hit a Quintorius would be nice. Sharpshooter's next. They'll go exploring. But at 17 I'm feeling pretty safe. Unless O'Hara O'Neill gets involved to amplify their damage. And we immediately hit Quintorius, perfect. Of course, could have also hit like a 2 or 3 mana card and then Quintorius, which would have been even better. But let's discover. And then play another Capstone, which will trigger Quintorius in the process. Ooh, opponent had a Helix. Alright, I got punished for activating Quintorius right away. Of course, they could have also had a Get Lost for all we know. And an Arc isn't bad either. Yeah, it's probably worth it to activate. Find another tablet. And I can even cast a Burst Lightning. Certainly can't complain this game. We've been pretty lucky so far. Opponent's got a Headliner, they can explore onto it. but I would be surprised if they claw their way back. Another sharpshooter on top. And double tablet. That's a lot of value. A lantern probably looking to exile something from my graveyard to trigger the arc. See what we mill first. Split up. Should maybe first play the lantern and sacrifice it in case I draw another arc, so I get to deal more damage when playing split up. So I should have waited on playing the land. And draw with lantern. And we did actually find another arc. And I've already played a land, so missed out on 1 damage here. Alright, so our opponent takes another 2. We know they're drawing a sharpshooter, which isn't gonna do much. 22 cards remaining, so we still have plenty of time to close it out here. Another Quintorius left in the deck to maybe deal damage as we resolve our Capstone. And sure, I'll cast a Pyroclasm, can maybe draw another burn spell to finish off Sharpshooter. Alright, so start by milling. Found Quintorius, excellent. So then now, first play a Lantern. Hit something from my graveyard. Trigger double arc. Sack Lantern. In case I found another arc before we start playing things out. And we know they're drawing Raphael, so Quintorius is safe to discover. Pursue, discard. I'll land at this point. Play land, trigger arc. Flashback, pursue, using the tablets as much as possible. Eight cards left, so now I have to be a little bit careful that I don't go too crazy. But our opponents should be dead here if we just pursue again and then Helix. Well, I guess I did not leave myself with any white mana. Alright, that's a little awkward. Luckily, Pyroclasm can clean up the Sharpshooter. And then next turn, they should be dead. But yeah, this goes to show that we do tend to mill and draw a lot of cards. So we do have to be careful that the game doesn't go too long. But now we get to see Quintorius trigger off the Capstone. And then whatever spell we cast from the Capstone also triggers Quintorius. So that can get the game over with pretty quickly. So yeah, we got to see this boros control deck in action. Definitely has a few weak spots with the current main deck configuration. As we mentioned, indestructible creatures. Of course, if we don't draw the right graveyard hit against the graveyard deck, we can also fall behind. But we've got a lot of card draw and self-mill to find whatever we need in certain matchups, so that's usually not a huge problem. And then eventually we just need to make sure we can close out a game before we draw from an empty library. So we definitely don't want to be up against any mill decks, since those can speed up the process and potentially mill us out before we figure out lethal. But the Arc is a pretty nice card draw engine that kind of doubles up as a win condition. And then we got to see Quintorius with a Capstone also having great synergy. So there's definitely a nice foundation here for a control deck. So yeah, that's going to do it for today's gameplay. Want to thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.